They don't want you to think clearly, because if you did, even for 10 seconds, you'd walk away from everything that's been silently killing you. You wouldn't beg to be included in spaces that diminish you. You wouldn't explain yourself to people who enjoy misunderstanding you. You wouldn't keep trading your peace for temporary praise, or tearing your mind apart just to fit into a version of yourself that pleases others. You'd see the trap for what it is, an emotional maze designed to keep you distracted, obedient, and predictable. And the moment you stepped back, the moment your mind grew quiet and sharp, you'd become dangerous, because clarity burns through manipulation. It tears the mask off false urgency, fake loyalty, and performative love. So ask yourself, how many of your decisions are truly yours? How many are inherited, demanded, expected? This isn't about thinking more. It's about thinking clean. That's the essence of Stoicism. Not cold detachment, but discipline, truth. The willingness to strip away illusion until your thoughts belong to you again. If you're tired of living in reaction, of being ruled by noise, then this is where the shift begins. Most people believe they're thinking when, in reality, they're just reacting. The difference is subtle but powerful. A real thought is intentional. It's built, shaped, examined, and owned. But reactions? Reactions are fast, automatic, and almost always invisible. They wear the mask of thought, but underneath, they're just emotional echoes. Someone raises their voice, and suddenly you're defensive. A choice appears, and you feel the tight grip of anxiety, so you avoid it. You tell yourself you're being smart, cautious, strategic, but if you trace it back, that wasn't a decision. It was a triggered response, a flash of emotion pretending to be clarity. We live in a world that encourages speed, not depth. And in that speed, there's no room for pause. Everything is now. Everything is urgent. Everything is loud. But clarity can't exist in chaos. Clear thinking doesn't rush. It steps back. It asks, where did that feeling come from? What am I assuming here? Most people never ask those questions. They never question the voice inside their head because they assume it's their own. But often, it's not. It's the voice of a parent you tried to please, a crowd you feared, a belief you absorbed without consent, and without knowing it, your mind becomes a theater for everyone else's story, except your own. The Stoics taught that emotion isn't the problem. The problem is unexamined emotion. As Epictetus said, it's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. That sentence holds a brutal kind of freedom, because if your judgment creates your suffering, then your clarity can destroy it. But first, you have to slow down enough to see what's really driving you. Most people never get there. They feel angry and assume someone else caused it. They feel ashamed and assume they deserve it. They feel anxious and assume there's something to fear. But every one of those emotions starts with a belief. And if the belief is faulty, the emotion is misleading. There's no clarity in that loop. Only repetition. The same arguments. The same breakdowns. The same regrets. And still, people call it life. But if you don't know the root of your reactions, how can you ever say your choices are your own? Think about how many times you've made a decision just to avoid discomfort. How many things you've agreed to out of guilt. How often you've stayed silent, not because you agreed, but because your body feared disapproval. That's not choice. That's survival dressed up in manners. And over time, that habit becomes your personality. You're not calm. You've just trained yourself to suppress the fire. You're not indecisive. You've just learned to confuse discomfort with danger. So what does real thinking look like? It looks like tension, like resistance, like slowing down when everything else is speeding up. It's uncomfortable because clarity demands confrontation. You have to face yourself in the mirror, not the version that's socially acceptable, but the version that's still carrying old wounds, old fears, old programming. You have to become brutally honest about your own internal mechanisms. Why do certain people trigger you? Why do you avoid certain conversations? Why do you keep repeating the same cycles, even when you know better? Clarity starts to form when you stop blaming the world for your reactions and start questioning their source. Not in a self-punishing way, but in a self-liberating way. Because the moment you realize that your reaction is not the final word, it's just the starting point, you start to take back control. You stop being a puppet for your own conditioning. You stop giving away power in every conversation, every argument, every decision. You stop letting feelings make choices for you. You begin to hold space between stimulus and response. And in that space, your mind becomes your own again. But clarity doesn't scream. It whispers. It asks you to observe without rushing to conclusion. It invites you to sit with discomfort long enough to see what it's made of. It shows you that the mind is not a battleground of emotions to conquer, but a terrain to understand. That's the Stoic path, not to eliminate feelings, but to see them clearly. To strip away the illusion that your first impulse is always right, because most of the time, it's not. Your first impulse is the loudest, but rarely the wisest. True thinking asks you to wait, to step back, to watch how your body tenses, your breath shortens, your thoughts race, and then, only then, to respond with intent, not reflex. This isn't easy work. It's hard to tell yourself the truth when your whole life has been built around avoiding it. But every time you choose awareness over autopilot, you build something unshakable inside you. You stop being the person who needs the world to change in order to find peace. You become the kind of person who carries clarity through chaos. And that kind of clarity is not just a mindset. It's a form of power. Quiet, unassuming, but immovable. So the next time you feel the urge to react, to defend, to withdraw, to lash out, pause. Just for a moment. Ask yourself, is this mine? Or is this inherited? Is this truth? Or just a habit? That one moment of stillness could be the difference between repeating your past and creating your future. And that, more than anything, is what Stoic clarity offers. The power to respond, not just react. To choose, not just comply. To think, not just feel. And when you can do that consistently, your life stops being a collection of reactions and starts becoming a map you're actually directing. Because thinking clearly isn't just about making better choices. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to be rescued from their own mind. And in a world full of noise, that's a rare kind of freedom. Watch closely, and you'll see it happen almost every day. Not out there, in here. You feel something. A pull. A spark. A rush of urgency. Maybe it's attraction. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's excitement dressed up as destiny. But whatever it is, it hits first, fast, loud. And without even realizing it, your mind starts scrambling to make it make sense. You don't start with reason. You start with emotion, and reason comes limping in afterward, trying to justify the choice your body already made. It feels right, you tell yourself. It must mean something. But what if that feeling wasn't wisdom? What if it was just familiarity? And what if the familiarity was rooted in your oldest wounds? There's a strange comfort in what we already know, even if what we know is pain. You might find yourself drawn to people who remind you of your past, not because it's love, but because it's recognizable. You might feel urgency around an opportunity, not because it's right, but because you're scared of missing out. You think you're being intuitive, but you're actually being pulled by fear. And when fear leads, logic doesn't resist. It cooperates. It puts on a mask and tells you a story. A beautiful, reasonable, compelling story. One designed not to guide you, but to protect you from feeling the fear underneath. It happens in relationships. You feel seen by someone and call it connection. But maybe it's just relief. Relief that someone finally notices you. And so you cling, not because it's healthy, but because you've been starving. It happens in career decisions. You get an offer and your stomach tightens, not because it's aligned, but because it feels scarce. So you convince yourself it's your big break, when really, it's your big panic. And if you look back honestly, most of your worst decisions didn't come from a lack of logic. They came from loyalty to a feeling you never paused to question. That's the danger of unexamined emotion. It drives the car while logic decorates the dashboard. You think you're in control, but you're really just narrating what your inner world already decided. And this isn't a flaw. It's not a character defect. It's just how the mind tries to survive. Emotion is ancient. It's fast, instinctive, protective. But when you build your life around its impulses, you become reactive instead of intentional. Most people live at the mercy of their emotional weather. They think if something feels intense, it must be important. If it hurts, it must be true. If it excites them, it must be a sign. But clarity doesn't work that way. Clarity doesn't follow emotion. It holds it still, it lets it speak, but it doesn't let it lead. When you think clearly, you become aware of the difference between what you want and what you're addicted to, between what feels familiar and what's actually good for you. And that awareness changes everything. You stop rushing to justify every emotional spike. You stop calling every pull a calling. You start recognizing that your brain can't always be trusted to tell you the truth in the moment, especially not when it's trying to avoid pain. You slow down. You wait for the feeling to settle. You ask yourself, if I wasn't feeling this, what would I know? And sometimes the answer is painful. You might see that what you thought was love was just validation, that what you called ambition was just comparison, that what you felt was urgency was just your fear trying to outrun itself. And this doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become free. Free to feel without being ruled by feeling. Free to notice emotion without obeying it. Because emotion isn't the enemy. It's information. It's just not the whole story. Like a spark, it can light a fire or burn down your house. The difference is whether or not you act before you think, before you pause, before you check in with what you truly value. Clarity asks for that pause. It creates space between the feeling and the follow-through. And in that space, you get to choose what kind of person you are. You might still feel afraid, but you won't let fear drive the decision. You might still feel drawn, but you'll ask what you're really being drawn to. You'll start to recognize the difference between desire and desperation, between intuition and impulse, and that awareness will feel like losing something. Because it is. You're losing the illusion that feelings are facts. You're letting go of the story that says, if I feel it, it must be true. And that loss is the beginning of maturity. People will tell you to trust your gut. And sometimes, yes, your gut knows. But sometimes, your gut is just your past in disguise. Sometimes your gut is just anxiety pretending to be wisdom. That's why you need more than feeling. You need philosophy. You need stillness. You need internal structure. Because without it, every strong emotion becomes a storm you can't navigate. But with it, you become someone who can feel deeply and still decide wisely. And that's the essence of Stoic clarity. Not to suppress emotion, but to observe it clearly without rushing to obey it. The Stoics didn't deny feeling. They just refused to be ruled by it. They practiced the pause. They trained themselves to separate the sensation from the story, so that when it came time to act, their decisions were grounded, not in panic or pressure, but in purpose. That's the kind of clarity you build. Not in a moment, but over time, by noticing the pattern, by catching yourself mid-justification, by asking gently, is this true? Or is this just familiar? And the more you ask, the more power you gain. Not the kind of power that dominates others. The kind that anchors you. The kind that lets you move through chaos without being hijacked by every wave of emotion. The kind that sees clearly, even when the feeling is loud, because you've learned something most people never do. Emotions are real, but they're not reliable. And until you can feel them without obeying them, you'll always be dancing to someone else's rhythm. But when you stop dancing, when you pause, feel, and choose, you become untouchable. You're no longer living in reaction. You're moving with quiet clarity, not because it feels good, but because it's right. And that difference, though invisible, is what transforms a reactive life into a deliberate one. It's what turns emotional noise into meaningful action. And over time, it's what makes your decisions not just smarter, but sacred. Most people think they're being careful when they wait. They believe the longer they hold off, the more clarity they'll gain. They don't realize that what they're really doing is waiting for certainty, a kind of perfection that doesn't exist outside their imagination. You hear it in the way they talk. I just need a little more time. Once I'm sure, I'll make the move. But underneath those words isn't wisdom. It's fear. And fear, when it wears the mask of logic, convinces you that hesitation is safety, that the unknown is always a threat, that until you see every possible outcome, you're not ready. But that's not clarity. That's a strategy to avoid commitment, a way to delay the discomfort of responsibility while feeling like you're doing something wise. The truth is, no one is ever completely ready. Not for the big decisions. Not for the hard conversations. not for the moments that demand growth. Readiness, in the way most people imagine it, is a myth. It's a mental loophole. You think you're buying time, but you're really trading momentum for illusion. And the longer you wait, the more your mind fills in the blanks with fear. You imagine the worst. You catastrophize. You play out every scenario that could go wrong. And soon, you're no longer standing still. You're stuck. Stuck in a cycle of overthinking and underliving. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." The Stoics knew that the mind can be its own tormentor, that the pain we predict is often worse than the pain we'll ever experience. But certainty addicts don't know this yet. They think if they just wait long enough, the perfect moment will arrive. The path will clear. The fear will vanish. But it doesn't, because clarity doesn't come before action. It's born from it. You don't get clear and then move. You move, and the fog starts to lift. That's what separates the Stoic mindset from the rest. It's not recklessness. It's respect for time. It's understanding that movement itself sharpens thought. When you engage with life, when you step into discomfort, when you make the call or take the risk, you don't become less clear. You become more aware. You learn what works and what doesn't. You feel where the resistance is and where it's just fear in disguise. And that feedback, real feedback, not imagined outcomes, is where clarity begins to form. But that requires courage. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up without applause. The kind that says, even if I don't know everything, I know enough to begin. That shift in posture is what turns someone from passive observer to active participant in their own life. Because when you demand certainty before acting, you're not protecting yourself. You're holding yourself hostage. You're turning your own potential into a problem to be solved, instead of a path to be walked. The need for certainty kills momentum. It takes every spark of desire, every moment of insight, every whisper of intuition, and buries it under analysis. You start to question your own instinct. You doubt your timing. You seek external confirmation, hoping someone will give you permission to leap. But no one ever will. Not fully, because the clarity you're looking for isn't in someone else's approval. It's in your own movement. In the decision to act, knowing you might be wrong, but choosing to live anyway. That's not recklessness. That's responsibility. And that's where real strength is built. Not in the perfect decision, but in the willingness to bear the weight of your choice. To say, this is mine. I chose it. I'll face what comes. That kind of ownership doesn't come from waiting. It comes from stepping in, fully present, fully aware that outcomes are uncertain, but your intent is clean. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not to wait for the world to make sense, but to act in a way that brings your own sense to the world. You don't have to know exactly how it ends to begin. You don't have to have a map to take the first step. And you certainly don't need to silence all fear before moving forward. You just need to get honest about what's really holding you back. Is it wisdom? Or is it avoidance? Is it reflection? Or is it delay? Because most of the time, the longer you wait for clarity, the harder it becomes to act. The decision grows in your mind like a shadow. And shadows feed on time. The more you feed them, the darker they get. But when you move, when you decide, even without full certainty, you take away their power. You interrupt the pattern. You stop giving energy to a question that was never meant to be solved in theory, but lived in practice. And that shift changes everything, because you begin to trust yourself, not because you know all the answers, but because you're no longer afraid of being wrong. That's what makes your mind stronger. Not perfection, but movement. Not guarantees, but growth. And even if you fail, even if the decision leads to pain, it was still the right move. Why? Because you acted from alignment, not fear. And from that action, you learned something you couldn't have learned any other way. Something alive. Something earned. Something real. And that reality, no matter how imperfect, will always be more useful than the fantasy of certainty. Clarity, in the end, isn't a feeling. It's a posture, a way of standing in your life that says, I won't wait to be ready. I'll get ready by moving. It's not about always being right. It's about being willing. Willing to show up, to try, to adjust, to learn. And that willingness is the foundation of everything meaningful, because the person who needs every answer before they begin never begins. But the one who walks forward anyway, quietly, imperfectly, boldly, builds a life that's not only clear, but deeply lived. We live in the age of information, yet most of it leaves us more confused than empowered. There's no shortage of opinions, explanations, strategies, and stories. Scroll long enough and you'll find 1,000 ways to live, think, heal, win, grow, detach, love, let go, and then start all over again. It feels like wisdom, but it rarely changes anything. You listen to a podcast while you drive, swipe through advice threads during lunch, drown in the noise of other people's thinking. And by the end of the day, your head is full, but your direction is still foggy, because clarity was never about how much you know. It's about knowing what to ignore. The truth is, most information isn't there to help you. It's there to keep you watching, scrolling, and wanting more. It plays on your curiosity, your insecurity, your need to feel like you're doing something just by learning something. But consumption is not clarity. In fact, if you're not careful, it becomes the very thing that blinds you. It dulls your instincts. You stop trusting your own voice because it gets buried under 100 other voices that sound more confident, more polished, more certain. And slowly, without meaning to, you hand over your inner compass to people who don't even know your terrain. Clarity doesn't get built in a storm of opinions. It gets built in silence, in the space between thoughts, where your own insights finally have room to rise. But we're taught to fear that silence. We fill it with noise, afraid that if we stop taking things in, we'll fall behind. But fall behind who? Behind what? The pursuit of constant input is often a disguised fear of decision-making. You keep gathering information because you're too afraid to act on what you already know. So you tell yourself you need more. Another voice, another viewpoint, another reason to delay. But if the information doesn't change your next action, it's just noise. And noise doesn't feel dangerous until it becomes normal, until the constant hum of distraction is so familiar that real thinking feels uncomfortable. You sit alone, and your hand reaches for a device without even thinking. You feel uncertain, and you open a new tab looking for an answer. You feel pain, and instead of facing it, you search for something to label it, not to understand it, but to escape it. This isn't learning. It's avoidance with a sophisticated mask. Carl Jung warned us that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And endless information is one of the easiest ways to avoid because it feels productive. You can convince yourself you're working on yourself when really you're just looping, collecting philosophies like trophies, but never letting them transform you. Because transformation doesn't come from exposure. It comes from integration. And integration requires space, stillness, honesty. Not with the world, but with yourself. You have to start filtering ruthlessly. Not everything deserves a place in your mind. Not every voice should have access to your inner world. You need boundaries, not just in your relationships, but in your consumption. You wouldn't let a stranger walk into your house and rearrange your furniture. So why do you let random content rearrange your priorities, your beliefs, your emotional state? The most dangerous voice in your life isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the quiet influence of unexamined input. The video you didn't question. The post that subtly shifted your perspective. The conversation that planted doubt without you noticing. This is where discipline becomes more powerful than intelligence. It's easy to collect insights. It's hard to decide what deserves your attention. The Stoics understood this long before the digital age. They spoke of guarding the mind like a fortress, not just from attack, but from clutter, because clutter leads to confusion. And confusion, over time, leads to erosion. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself in pieces, one unchecked influence at a time. One distraction that turned into a habit. One article that seeded doubt. One piece of advice that sounded wise, but led you away from what you already knew to be true. So start asking different questions. Not, is this interesting? Or, is this popular? But, does this help me move? Does this sharpen my next decision? Does this align with what I value? And if the answer is no, let it go. Not everything deserves a response. Not every topic deserves your curiosity. Some things are loud only because they want your energy. But clarity is quiet. It waits for those who are willing to tune out the chaos and come back to themselves. It's not about being closed-minded. It's about being intentional. Open-mindedness doesn't mean letting everything in. It means being open to truth and ruthless with everything else. It means knowing that you can't think clearly if your mind is constantly being pulled in 10 directions. You can't know your next step if every voice outside is telling you a different path. You can't feel your own intuition if it's drowned in content. And this is where true growth happens. Not in the rush to consume, but in the discipline to discern, in the courage to say, I've heard enough. Now it's time to listen to myself. That's not arrogance. That's maturity. It's trusting that you don't need 100 opinions to make a single meaningful decision. You need presence. You need focus. You need space. Because clarity isn't the result of information overload. It's what emerges when the noise fades, when the world goes quiet enough for your own wisdom to be heard. And if you want to live a life that reflects your values, your truth, your power, you have to protect that space like it matters. Because it does. It's the foundation of every decision that shapes who you become. Clarity often feels like a mental problem, but it begins in a physical space. You can try every technique, journal your thoughts, listen to wisdom, even seek silence. But if your environment is chaotic, your mind will reflect that chaos. You might think they're separate, your desk, your phone, your space, and then your thoughts, your moods, your decisions. But they're not separate. The environment you keep is the container for your mind. And if that container is filled with noise, mess, distraction, and stimulation, it becomes nearly impossible to access a quiet thought. The world outside becomes the blueprint for what happens inside. Look around. Not just casually, really look. Are there papers everywhere? Tabs open you haven't touched in days? Half-written ideas scattered across apps and notebooks? That isn't just disorganization. That's mental friction. Each item is a tug. Each notification is a leak. Each reminder of an unfinished task pulls a little bit of your energy without asking permission. And over time, this adds up. You don't even realize how much you're spending just trying to mentally push away the clutter. That's why so many people feel drained before they even begin. It's not that they're lazy. It's that their space is designed to exhaust them. And then, in the middle of all that, they try to make important decisions. They try to think clearly about their future, their relationships, their purpose. But the brain doesn't perform at its best in chaos. You wouldn't plan a battle strategy in a nightclub. You wouldn't write your will during an earthquake. Yet people try to build their lives quietly, deliberately, while surrounded by digital storms, crowded rooms, and scattered minds. It doesn't work, not because they're incapable of clarity, but because clarity can't breathe in that environment. A Stoic protects their state. That doesn't mean you need absolute silence, a minimalist home, or to live in the mountains. It means you take responsibility for the atmosphere that surrounds your thoughts. You choose to guard it the same way you'd guard your time or your energy. You start to notice what you allow into your field. What lights are constantly flickering around you? What conversations you're listening to, even when you're not talking? What energy lives in your space without your consent? Clarity doesn't need perfection, but it needs intention. When your environment is clean, not just in appearance but in energy, your thoughts stop rushing. You begin to feel the difference between what matters and what's simply urgent. The distinction becomes clearer between what you're being pulled into and what you are choosing. There's a kind of presence that returns. A stillness, not the kind of stillness that's empty or numb, but the stillness that comes from alignment. The feeling of being in a space that supports your highest self, not fights against it. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." But here's the truth most people miss. You can't look inside properly when the outside is pulling at your sleeves. The inner world needs peace to open. And peace requires preparation, not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts. Making your bed in the morning isn't just a chore. It's a signal. Closing unused tabs isn't just tidiness. It's clarity made visible. Turning your phone face down isn't just manners. It's self-respect. These small actions are not about being neat. They're about removing obstacles between you and your deepest thoughts. Most people underestimate how deeply space affects psyche. They think mental discipline alone will carry them. But the body is a gateway. When the eyes see clutter, the brain prepares for stress. When the ears hear constant pings and movement, the nervous system reacts as if it's under attack. You start the day already agitated, not because of a crisis, but because your system is overloaded with meaningless signals. The brain can only track so much, and if it's tracking noise, it can't track depth. That's why clarity often shows up after you've cleaned a room, taken a walk, or turned everything off. It's not magic. It's space. It's giving your thoughts room to echo, and your intuitions room to rise. We're not built to be stimulated all day. We're not built to make sense of our lives in between dings and pop-ups and fragments of other people's thoughts. Clarity isn't found in more. It's found in less. Less distraction. Less clutter. Less noise. So that what remains can be felt fully. It's also about boundaries, not just physical ones, but energetic ones. Who are you letting into your space? What kind of conversations are happening around you? What do you tolerate in the name of politeness that leaves you scattered afterward? Your environment is not just objects. It's people, voices, and patterns. And the more you allow what drains you to stay near you, the harder it becomes to hear yourself. You're not weak for needing boundaries. You're wise for recognizing what dims your inner clarity. A clean environment is an act of self-honesty. It reflects that you're ready to stop letting life happen to you, that you're willing to create the conditions where your best self can show up. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. Start small. Clean one corner. Turn off one notification. Cancel one unnecessary obligation. These little shifts are powerful. They create momentum. They send a message to your subconscious, I'm serious about this. And your mind will respond. It will begin to settle, to sharpen, to listen. The Stoics believed that the mind should not be ruled by circumstance, but they also understood that we must train the mind to withstand temptation, to resist indulgence, to return to the essential. That discipline begins where your body is, not later, not when everything's perfect, but right now, in the space you inhabit. Make it sacred, not through ritual, but through respect. Respect for your mind, respect for your peace, respect for your clarity, because clarity isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you prepare for. It enters the room when there's space for it to sit down, and if you don't create that space, it won't shout. It won't fight the clutter. It will just leave quietly. So choose now to make room, to let your space reflect your intentions, to let your environment become a silent ally in your search for deeper thought. That's where clarity begins. Not in your thoughts, but in the place where those thoughts are allowed to unfold. Most people don't know what they're optimizing for. They think they do. They say words like peace, freedom, love, meaning. But if you observe their actions, something doesn't add up. They say they want peace, but they never put down the chaos. They stay in relationships that drain them, jobs that agitate them, routines that offer no room to breathe. They say they want freedom, yet keep chasing the kind of approval that makes them a prisoner to everyone else's opinion. They say they want to feel whole, but they build their lives around the fragments: status, followers, attention, noise. They don't realize it, but their decisions already answered the question they never took time to ask. What am I really optimizing for? Because whether you're aware of it or not, you're always optimizing for something. Every choice you make is a vote in the direction of what matters most to you. Not what you say matters. What actually governs your choices? That's what makes this realization uncomfortable. Because your outcomes don't contradict your values, they expose them. You think you're unlucky, distracted, stuck. But most of the time, you're just aligned with a priority you didn't mean to give power to. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's the illusion of control. You keep looping through the same situations, not because you're cursed, but because you're subconsciously loyal to a version of yourself that was built to survive, not thrive. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's what happens when you don't define your aim. Life starts aiming for you. And usually, it aims low. It aims for quick highs, easy wins, safe roads, familiar traps. not because you're incapable of more, but because the systems around you reward indecision. They give you distractions so you never feel the need to sit with your own direction. You're nudged, guided, flooded with options, but never told to clarify the compass that should be driving all of it. So you get pulled. Instead of choosing, you end up chasing opportunities that sound good but feel wrong. You achieve things that impress people you don't even respect. You build momentum in a direction that makes you feel more lost, not less. This is the part where most people collapse, not because they're weak, but because clarity demands honesty. And honesty can feel brutal when you've built a life around bypassing it. When you say you want peace but keep choosing environments that reward emotional chaos, something has to give. When you say you want love but keep choosing the kind of validation that feels more like performance than connection, you eventually run out of excuses. That tension isn't failure. It's feedback. It's your deeper self reminding you that the map you're following isn't aligned with the place you want to go. Clarity doesn't require that you get everything perfect. It requires that you get specific. What do you actually want your life to move toward? Not just in moments of reflection, but in everyday action. Is it freedom? Then why are your habits wrapped in dependency? Is it strength? Then why are your boundaries built to please? Is it truth? Then why do you silence yourself to keep the peace? These aren't accusations. They're invitations. An honest life begins when you stop pretending the surface and the center are the same. It's not enough to want something. You have to protect it. You have to name it clearly and let it guide the hard choices. That's what it means to define what you're optimizing for, not in theory, but in practice. You look at the trade-offs you're willing to make. You accept that you can't serve everything at once. You can't prioritize comfort and growth at the same time. You can't chase acceptance and authenticity without feeling torn. You have to choose. And that choice will cost you, but it's the cost that makes it powerful. When your aim becomes singular, your mind starts to clean itself. The unnecessary starts to fall away. You stop negotiating with every new opinion. You stop trying to be good at everything. You stop saying yes just to be liked. You become more intentional, less apologetic. You start designing your life around the inner signal, not the external noise. And with that, the quality of your decision-making changes. You don't just ask, what do I feel like doing? You ask, does this move me toward what I truly want to embody? That question breaks patterns. It keeps you from betraying yourself for short-term relief. It grounds you when distractions start to sparkle. It clarifies your values when everything around you blurs them. And clarity, once it takes root, makes your life simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You'll still face hard days, difficult people, setbacks, but you'll stop getting lost in them. Because even when the path is unclear, the direction isn't. You know what you're walking toward. And that knowledge changes your posture. It gives you something the world can't take from you. Internal coherence. The Stoics believed in living according to nature, which meant living in alignment with your own rational, examined self. They didn't chase every impulse. They didn't optimize for fleeting highs. They optimized for virtue, for inner strength, for a life of integrity. That doesn't mean they were perfect. It means they chose to live by a compass they had tested. They knew what they were aiming for, so even in uncertainty, their movement was grounded. You need that same clarity, especially now, when the world sells you 1,000 goals that look like success but feel like emptiness. Defining your aim is how you cut through that. It's how you resist being pulled into lives that don't belong to you. It's how you make peace with the fact that some things will have to be left behind, not because they're wrong, but because they're not aligned. And alignment is more valuable than abundance. It's not about having everything. It's about moving with focus, depth, and honesty, every day, in every choice. So pause and ask yourself, not abstractly, but practically, what are you really optimizing for when you speak, when you choose, when you commit? What sits beneath that? If it's unclear, don't panic. Just listen. Clarity doesn't shout. It waits. It emerges slowly as you peel away the noise. But once it arrives, you'll feel it. You'll recognize the quiet conviction it brings. You'll stop trying to be everything and start becoming something. Not all at once, but steadily. In a way that lasts. There's a quiet danger in indecision. It doesn't look like fear. It looks like flexibility. It wears the mask of patience, of wisdom, of being open. You've heard it before. Stay open. Keep your options alive. Don't rush into anything. And yes, in certain moments that can be good advice. But repeated often enough, applied too broadly, it becomes a strategy for avoidance. Not choosing feels safe because it postpones the discomfort of regret. But here's the truth. Indecision isn't wisdom. It's fear with a softer voice. You tell yourself you're taking your time, but really, you're hoping life will decide for you. That some perfect sign will come. That something outside you will make the uncomfortable choice you're afraid to make inside. But life doesn't work that way. It rewards movement, not hesitation. Direction, not drifting. The person who hesitates too long begins to confuse stillness with safety. But drifting isn't peace. It's erosion. Bit by bit, your confidence wears away. You second-guess even the small things. And over time, you become someone who waits for clarity, for confirmation, for certainty, and forgets what it means to act from the core. Clarity doesn't come from floating. It comes from choosing, from making a decision, and meeting what follows with courage. A decisive mistake will teach you more than endless speculation ever will. But we avoid that mistake, don't we? Because being wrong feels like failure. It hurts the ego. It makes you question your judgment. And yet, indecision carries a cost of its own, a quieter, longer-lasting kind. The kind where days pass and nothing changes. The kind where years go by and you're still wondering, still weighing, still waiting. That's not caution. That's avoidance wrapped in the language of reason. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "A wrongdoer is often the man who has left something undone, not always he who has done something." That's a powerful reversal. We're so afraid of doing the wrong thing, but we rarely fear the weight of what we didn't do, the words we didn't say, the moves we never made, the ideas we let die before they were born. And what's worse, those losses don't scream. They don't break like bad decisions do. They fade quietly into the background, and suddenly, your life isn't built on choices. It's built on omissions, things that never happened because you told yourself it wasn't the right time. And we justify it with such noble phrases. I'm being wise. I'm just not sure yet. But dig deeper, and you'll usually find fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of closing a door. Fear of failure, of course. But also fear of identity shift. Because the moment you choose, you define yourself. You leave something behind. And that finality scares us. So we delay. We say yes and no at the same time. We live in the middle. Half-hearted, half-present, half-alive. But you don't grow there. You grow at the edge, where decisions demand you to be seen, where you commit to something even knowing it might not work, because that's where your clarity sharpens. Not before the choice, but after it. Movement brings contrast. It shows you the terrain. You step forward, and the fog begins to lift. And even if it turns out to be the wrong path, at least now you know. You're not wondering anymore. You're learning. You're adapting. You're becoming someone who moves. That movement doesn't have to be loud or bold. It doesn't have to change your whole life overnight. But it does have to be yours, chosen, owned, clear. Because the more you practice choosing, the stronger your discernment becomes. You stop needing everyone else's opinions. You stop needing to feel ready. You start trusting that clarity isn't a destination. It's a result of walking with intent. Carl Jung believed that indecision often came from a split inside the psyche, a conflict between two opposing desires or fears. The part of you that wants to be seen, and the part of you that wants to stay safe. The part of you that longs for transformation, and the part that clings to the comfort of who you've always been. This internal tension isn't a flaw. It's part of being human. But if you don't resolve it through conscious choice, it will quietly rule you from the shadows. You'll keep saying maybe when your soul is screaming for a yes or a no. So don't glorify indecision. Don't mistake delay for depth. Real depth comes from showing up with your full weight, from saying, I don't know how this ends, but I choose this anyway, and then allowing whatever follows to shape you. That's how strength is built, not by knowing the future, but by being willing to meet it on your own terms. And yes, you might make mistakes. You might change your mind. That's part of the process. But indecision isn't neutral. It costs energy. It drains focus. It keeps your attention divided. You can't be present in your current path if your mind is still negotiating another. Decision creates closure. And closure creates peace. Not always comfort, but peace. A kind of internal stillness that says, this is the way I'm going. And that stillness is where real clarity lives. So if you've been floating, come back to the ground. Choose, not recklessly, but bravely. Listen to your resistance, but don't let it decide. Hear your fear, but don't let it write the script. Define your values. Check your direction. And then move, because waiting for the perfect moment is the most seductive trap of all. It makes you feel like you're being wise when really, you're just being delayed. Let your clarity come from motion. Let your confidence come from action. And let your strength come not from never doubting, but from no longer needing to avoid doubt to make a move. That's how decisive people are built. Not from being certain, but from being willing. And the more willing you become, the less power fear has to keep you still. Clarity isn't a destination you arrive at once and stay forever. It's not a certificate you earn or a state you achieve and then coast on. Clarity is a practice, a discipline, a way of living that you return to again and again, every single day, because the world will constantly try to pull you back into noise, into reaction, into distraction, into the comfort of not knowing so you don't have to choose. But now you know better. You know that thinking clearly isn't about intelligence, it's about honesty. You know that your first impulse isn't always your wisest voice. You know that emotions are real, but they're not reliable guides on their own. You know that waiting for certainty is often just fear wearing a patient mask. You know that your environment shapes your mind more than you realized. You know that clarity demands you define what you're actually optimizing for, not in words, but in action. And you know that decision, even imperfect decision, is the only path to growth. This is the Stoic way, not cold, not detached, not emotionless, but clear, grounded, intentional. The Stoics understood that life is short and most of it is wasted, not in pleasure or laziness, but in mental fog, in letting other people's voices drown out your own, in postponing the hard conversations, in confusing busyness with purpose, in mistaking reaction for thought. But you don't have to live that way. You can choose differently. You can build a mind that belongs to you. You can create space between stimulus and response. You can examine your beliefs, question your reactions, and own your direction. You can move through life not as a passenger, but as a navigator. Not perfect, not without fear, but clear about what matters. And that clarity, quiet, earned, unshakable, is the greatest form of freedom. So the next time you feel pulled, pause. The next time you feel reactive, breathe. The next time you feel uncertain, ask, what do I actually know? What do I actually value? And then act from that place, not from fear, not from pressure, not from noise, but from clarity. Because a clear mind doesn't need the world to be quiet. It carries its own stillness. A clear mind doesn't need all the answers. It trusts the process of discovery. A clear mind doesn't avoid pain. It integrates it. And over time, that mind becomes something rare, something powerful, something that can't be manipulated, rushed, or confused. A mind that sees through the noise. A mind that knows its own voice. A mind that moves with purpose, even in uncertainty. That's what Stoicism offers. Not a life without struggle, but a life with direction. Not a mind without doubt, but a mind that doesn't let doubt paralyze it. Not a person without emotion, but a person who doesn't let emotion drive the car. So guard your mind like it's sacred. Because it is. Protect your clarity like it's the foundation of everything. Because it is. And remember, you don't need to rescue yourself from the world. You need to rescue yourself from the noise. And most of that noise is internal. Old voices, old fears, old programs running on autopilot. But now you know how to interrupt them. Now you know how to step back, observe, and choose. And that power, quiet, unglamorous, but absolute, is yours. Thank you for walking this path. Keep sharpening your clarity. Keep questioning. Keep choosing. And keep building a life that's not just lived, but examined. Because in the end, the unexamined life isn't just unwise. It's unfree. But you? You're breaking free. One clear thought at a time.